Welcome back, and now we will be doing the term 4 revision. And what we're going to be looking at now will be the two concepts, first being unemployment and the second being labor relations. Right, when we think of the term unemployment, there are two definitions. We have what we call the expanded definition and we have the strict or official definition. So let's just look at them individually first. Your expanded definition includes unemployed persons not looking for a job or trying to become self-employed. So in actual fact, when you think of the expanded definition, it's saying anybody who is not working is unemployed. And in South Africa, this number was at 63.9% in the first quarter of 2022, meaning from January to March, that number was at 63.9%. The strict or official definition include only persons actively looking for work or trying to become self-employed. And that number was at 34.5% for the first quarter of 2022. So can you see the big difference between the expanded definition and the strict definition? Okay. So your number of unemployed persons divided by your labor force, that will be equal to your unemployment rate. Right, the causes of unemployment. In other words, why does unemployment exist? And there we've got 4 of them listed. There is cyclical, structural, frictional, and seasonal. Right, so I'm going to look at these ones individually quickly and just explain to you what each of these mean. So if you think of the term cyclical, this comes from, obviously, if you remember in term 1, you did what we call the business cycle. And there you looked at the different phases of the business cycle. And we know the business cycle consists of an upswing and a downswing. And what you were taught there, that when the business cycle is in a downswing, that is when we see the unemployment levels increasing. So cyclical unemployment is connected to the phase that the economy finds itself in. So when the economy is in a downward phase, which means it's either recession or a depression, that is the time we will see unemployment increasing. Okay, so that could be one of the reasons for the unemployment, is because your economy is in a downward spiral. The second one, we're looking at structural unemployment, okay? So what we mean here is that the structure has changed. So if you look in South Africa, this is a major part of our unemployment problem, because if you think about it, South Africa used to be heavily reliant on the primary sector. When the one thing that kickstarted the South African economy was mining. And from the mining and the agriculture, those sort of areas, which is all in your primary sector, those are the activities which kickstarted the South African economy. So a lot, and for years, that was sort of the sector that contributed the most to our economy. And what has happened is we've now sort of moved more into the tertiary sector. So in your primary sector, you don't need a lot of skill. Yes, you do still need skilled people, but not as many as the unskilled people that was needed. And that is why when they needed all these unskilled people, they had to go fetch people from outside to come and work in South Africa. But now that the structure has changed, where we're now more reliant on the tertiary sector that has now become the biggest contributor to our GDP, we find that the skills that is needed in your tertiary sector are very different from the skills needed in the primary sector. So therefore, we now sit with that has also contributed to the unemployment issue in South Africa. Right, is a structural change. Another example you can look at is when a business is busy restructuring, right? And then they realize, but with our new way of going, we don't need a certain department anymore, or they may decide that our business isn't profitable anymore, so we're just going to close down one sort of arm of the business. So now all those people that sort of worked within that section of the business are now unemployed. So what happens is that sometimes what companies do, instead of we doing our own in-house printing, we're rather going to outsource the printing work to a specific printing company, but they've got a whole department of people working within their printing department. So now they're outsourcing that work, so they don't have a need for that people anymore. So now that people land up being unemployed. So when we talk about structural unemployment, that is when either the structure of the business has changed or the structure of the economy has changed, where there's some sort of changeover happening, right? Or technology has now taken over, where you don't need that many people anymore. And this makes me now think of the banking system. There's so many banks that have now sort of gone smaller, where they don't need all these hundreds of people at the bank any longer, because everything or lots of stuff you can do online now, right? And then we have frictional unemployment. Now, frictional unemployment, it varies. Various reasons why this exists, but frictional unemployment actually exists where people are sort of between jobs. Let's say, for example, I decide I'm applying for a new job, but my new job starts in January and it is now September, and I'm finishing off with my current job at the end of September, but I'm only entering into the new job in January next year. So for that time between September and January, I'm not working, so I'm unemployed. That is an example of frictional unemployment. Another example would be new entrants into the labor market. For example, you're busy finishing off your degree, so you're now going to start applying for jobs. So you're finishing off your degree, exam finishes end of November, and you're waiting to hear from companies. And so for December, January, February, you're not studying, you're not working, so you are unemployed for that period, but your job starts in March perhaps of next year. So that would also be an example of frictional unemployment. Or it could be where somebody has said, no, I'm taking off, I'm having a woman would say, I'm having my baby, I'm taking off 3 years to first take care of my child, and then I'll come back into the job market again. So that person re-entering the job market, that would also be an example of frictional unemployment then. Right. And then also we have, I think the one that you are very familiar with is the seasonal unemployment, which we find happening in certain sectors mainly, right? Such as farming, hospitality, tourism industries, because remember, with your tourism industries, you have your sort of high seasons, right? And with hospitality as well, there's sort of these high seasons that you have where there are times when it's very, very busy and other times it's very quiet. So, for example, around November, December, when all companies are taking their staff out for Christmas lunches and stuff like that. So some restaurants find they are very busy over that period of time and they need to get in extra help for that period of time. Or your restaurants and hotels are also very busy over the summer holiday period perhaps, right? So they know that we need to get extra help for that. Your farms, as you know, farm work is also very seasonal, because if you're an apple farmer, there's nothing happening during winter, but in summer you need people to come and help pick those apples, so those people will then just work for that period of time. And that would be an example of how the season impacts on the employment. So very quickly, it is cyclical, which is linked to the business cycle, structural, when there is a restructuring happening, frictional, where people are between jobs, and then seasonal, which is directly related to the seasons. Right, the social problems, right? These are the problems caused by unemployment, right? So the social problems, being unemployed affects people's pride and dignity. If you are unemployed, you cannot provide for your family and may become desperate enough to turn to crime for money. Unemployment is the main reason for high levels of poverty in South Africa. Families who cannot pay their rent or bond repayments become homeless or have to rely on relatives or friends who may already be struggling financially. High crime rates make people scared and uncertain. High levels of substance abuse and domestic violence are common in communities with high unemployment rates. Boredom, depression, and lack of motivation are common problems for unemployed people. The economic problems that is caused by unemployment, we find since 2001, the government has increased its spending on social welfare grants to the poor. The government taxes workers and businesses to get the money to pay these grants. The money raised from these taxes could have been used for infrastructure such as schools, hospitals, and roads. Many more people in South Africa receive grants than pay taxes. And that in itself is worrisome, right? Because you are paying out more money than what you are getting in. So what is government going to do about this? So the government methods to combat unemployment, there is the UIF, which is known as the Unemployment Insurance Fund. So the Unemployment Insurance Fund is an insurance scheme that provides temporary income for people who have lost their jobs. It only pays out if you have previously been employed, and it only pays out for 6 months. It does not help people who have never been employed or who have been unemployed for more than 6 months. There is the Public Works Program. The National Public Works Program, the NPWP, was started in 1994 to upgrade South Africa's infrastructure and provide job opportunities at the same time. The NPWP uses labor-intensive methods to improve roads, pipelines, water supply and sanitation, and to build houses, schools, and clinics. This employs many unskilled people. People have the opportunity to learn new skills and improve the infrastructure at the same time. Now, you would have seen people along our roadways wearing bibs who says EPWP, which stands for Extended Public Works Program. And the problem with this, this is one of the ways that government is trying to address the issue of unemployment. However, with your public works program, it is a temporary fix. It's not like, oh, I managed to get an EPWP job, now I've got a job for life. No, you are given the job until that project is complete. But the idea behind this is so that people can learn a skill and then use that to go out there and find a job. Because remember, the first thing they're going to ask you is, what have you done? What experience do you have? What skills do you have? Then at least the person can say, I have done X, Y, and Z for the last 3 months. So at least they've learned something somewhere which can then make them employable. And that's the idea behind the Public Works Program. It's not sort of like, oh, I've now got a job and I'm set for life. Right. Give the correct concept for each of the following statements. Abbreviations and acronyms will not be accepted. The sum of employed and unemployed persons between the ages of 15 and 65. 1.2. Workers who lose their jobs can claim a portion of their wages from the fund for 6 months. 1.3. Includes all people who are out of work, whether or not they are willing or able to work. 1.4 is the provision of employment by the creation of public goods at prescribed wage for those unable to find alternative employment. 1.5 are key drivers of economic growth, innovation, and job creation. These are not easy statements, grade 10s. So you really need to think long and hard about your answers here. Don't rush it. Take your time and think about it. I'm going to give you 1 minute in which to think about these answers. Right. The first one obviously refers to your economically active population. Now, you see, if you wrote there, if you answered EAP, then that would not be marked because it says no acronyms, no abbreviations. The 1.2, once again, unemployment insurance fund, you've got to write it out in full. And then 1.3 is the expanded definition. 1.4 is the public works program, and 1.5 refers to the small, medium, micro enterprises. If you wrote SMME, you will not get the mark. You have to write it out in full. Small, medium, micro enterprises. Right, then we haven't dealt with an essay question for today yet. So this is a possible essay. Discuss in detail the different types of unemployment for 26 marks. And then your additional part of your essay is what strategies have been implemented by the South African government to redress the issue of unemployment for 10 marks. And then it says there the total is out of 40. But if my maths is correct, 26 plus 10 only gives me 36. Please bear in mind, grade 10s, you've got to know your layout of your essays. Remember, we have our definition for 2 marks, our introduction, which would be the definition. That would be for 2 marks. Then you have your body, main part, which is the 26 marks. And then you have your additional part for 10 marks. And you end off with a conclusion. Now, please, when you are doing this essay, just remember you have to do it by writing the words introduction, body, additional part, and conclusion. Okay? You have to have those sort of headings there. And also remember, when you're doing your body, it asks you to discuss the different types of unemployment. Now, remember, we looked at 4 of them. We looked at cyclical, frictional, structural, and seasonal. So you've got to put that heading there. So you will put there cyclical and then do a discussion. You will write there frictional and a discussion, seasonal and a discussion. And for each heading, you will receive a mark. So therefore, it is important to use those sort of subheadings within the body of your essay because those are marks that you will be given. So I'm going to give you a few moments to just think about how you intend answering this essay. I'm not going to ask you to now write out the essay because that's going to take you about 20-25 minutes to do the essay, but to just think about how you will go about answering this particular essay. Okay, I've already given you the body now about discussing in detail the different types of unemployment, but look at that additional part, the strategies that have been implemented by the SA government to redress the issue of unemployment. Right. Uh, Here's the answer, or how you should answer this essay. Unemployment is a situation in which members of the labor force are without work, are available or suitable for work, but are unable to find unemployment. Now, it says there, accept any other suitable introduction. Always bear in mind the introduction to an essay is always a definition. So you can give the expanded definition, you can give the official definition, you can try and define it in your own words. But however way you want to explain it, even if you want to define what labor force is, that would also be accepted as a definition, because unemployment is something which directly affects the labor force. So that would also be a possible introduction. Then your body, main part, the types of unemployment. See there, if you write frictional unemployment, you would be given a mark. And then this type of employment refers to people who are between jobs, for example, people who are changing jobs. Frictional unemployment refers to short-term unemployment. This type of unemployment can occur under conditions of full employment. Okay, so then structural unemployment, and as I said, you will do your discussion and you will find this answer or layout in your learner booklet. And I've also included the mark allocation so that you can see that you might have more than 26 ticks, but you can only get to a maximum of 26. Okay, you cannot score more than 26 for this section. Then the more is obviously your additional part. Now remember, your additional part will always differ. There will always be a different additional part. Your main body never changes. So here you can see there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 ticks, but you can only score to a maximum of 10 marks for that section. And then the conclusion to this essay, whatever you want to write as a conclusion would be acceptable. Okay. Right. Our last section that we're going to look at are the labor relations. Now, there are 3 main labor laws in South Africa, and these are your Basic Conditions of Employment Act, known as the BCEA, your Labour Relations Act, known as LRA, and the Employment Equity Act, known as EEA. So just very quickly, let us just go through those 3 main laws. It is BCEA, which stands for Basic Conditions of Employment Act. It is LRA, which is your Labour Relations Act, and it is EEA, which is your Employment Equity Act. Right, so if we look at the Basic Conditions of Employment Act first, this sets out the minimum conditions that ensure fair labour practices and human resource practices in the workplace. Okay, so within your basic condition, like the word or the name says it, Basic Conditions of Employment. So in your BCEA, there they will describe or lay out for you what your working conditions will be. Okay, so therefore within this act, they make provision for the hours of work. Now in South Africa, we are supposed to work a maximum of 45 hours for the week. It will state your overtime. It will state what are your breaks, the termination, meaning what are the kinds of things that will lead to termination, or when are you allowed to terminate. Must you give a day's notice, a month's notice, a term's notice, as well as what the employer will do. And then obviously there's a clause about child labour, as well as then about your public holidays, right? And what you need to remember is, as I said, it is 45 hours of work. When it comes to overtime, you are paid a time and a third of your normal time. So it is, so if you're earning 30 Rand an hour and you work overtime, you must then be paid a time and a third would be what you actually earn plus a third. So it's 30 Rand plus 10 Rand. So for overtime, you will get 40 Rand an hour. Your breaks, that can differ. You can have 2 tea breaks of half an hour each, or you can have a 1 full hour of lunch, but you have to have a break after every 5 hours that you've worked. And then obviously children cannot be employed under the age of 15. You cannot employ anybody. And public holidays, so if you expected to work on a public holiday, then obviously you have to be paid double time, and let's go with that 30 Rand an hour we're talking about. So if you're working on a public holiday, you will then get 60 Rand an hour. Right, the LRA, which is the Labour Relations Act, regulates the relationship between employer and employee. So here we're looking at the relationship. So the purpose of the LRA is provides a structure for labour relations between employees and employers, trade unions and employer organisations, promotes collective bargaining at the workplace or sectoral level, promotes fair labour practices between employers and employees, established the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, which is the CCMA. There's the Labour Court and the Labour Appeal Court. Now, what are all of these things doing here? Right. Just very in a nutshell, your CCMA, as the name say, Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. That's what CCMA stands for. So what happens is, let's say there's a dispute between me and my employer, and we are unable to settle this matter between us. Then we will go to the CCMA. Now, the CCMA is not there to fight for me or to fight for my employer. The CCMA is just a neutral person to listen to both sides of the story and then come to some sort of agreement. That is why it's called conciliation, right? Mediation and arbitration, okay? So they're there to mediate the discussion between the two parties, okay? And you only go that route if you are unable to settle this issue or settle the matter between yourselves. But your first point of call is obviously speak to your employer first, and you first try to settle the things on your own before you go the CCMA route. Right, and then we have the Labour Court, and obviously if you're not happy with what the Labour Court's judgment is, you can then go to the Labour Appeal Court. And then the last point there, advances economic development, which ensures that the workplace maintains the basic rights of employees. And then your Employment Equity Act, or the EEA, allows for improved and greater transformation processes in the workplace, because through the EEA, people are treated equally regardless of race, culture, age, language, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and religion. And very important, affirmative action is a policy that is embedded in the Employment Equity Act. It is not an act on its own, okay? Affirmative action is a policy which forms part of your Employment Equity Act. Another important act for labour, remember we just looked at the 3 most important ones, but there is others as well. There is the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Amendment Act, which is known as QUADA. Right? QUADA was established to promote and protect the health and safety of employees in the workplace. QUADA provides guidelines for the compensation of employees who sustain on-the-job injuries and contract diseases. It also provides guidelines when employees die as a result of work-related injuries. Okay, so if you get hurt on the job, if you hurt yourself at work, which means now you're going to be laid off for a couple of weeks or a couple of days, so you're not going to have any earnings in that time that you're off. Then what happens is, then your boss will still pay you, but he will claim that money back from COIDA, from the Compensation Act. Right, remuneration for labor, the difference between wages and salary. Wages, you paid weekly. Sorry, and this is calculated per hour. Salary, on the other hand, is paid monthly and is not time related. In economics, there is no distinction made, and therefore wages is seen as the reward for labor. Right, the factors that influence wage levels. Where there's a shortage of skilled workers, the immobility of workers, and where government sets minimum wages, as well as discrimination. Now, if you think about the first one, shortage of skilled workers, that's completely down to demand and supply. And as you know, when there is a shortage, the price is going to go up. Okay? So that's your shortage of skilled workers. Your immobility of workers. Immobility means workers are not moving, right? So that makes it difficult. So therefore that will influence the amount of money that people are being paid. And as you know, government sets the minimum wage in certain areas, and then obviously discrimination that happens shouldn't be happening according to the EEA, okay? There should be no more discrimination. In the past, men and women would do the same job and the men would get more just because they are male and they are seen as the breadwinners. Nowadays, that doesn't apply any longer, right? So you cannot discriminate in terms of gender, race, or anything like that. Factors that determine the demand for labor. So your wage rate, the lower the wage rate, the more labor is demanded. Meaning, the demand for labor goes up when the wage rate is low. Now, what we're saying is that the employers are willing to take on more people. They want more people to come and work for them because they don't have to pay them as much. The productivity of labor, the more productive labor is, the higher demand for it. The cost of other inputs in the production process. If, for example, capital goods are relatively cheaper than labor, producers will substitute capital for labor, thus reducing the demand for labor. And then the demand for consumer goods. The higher the demand for consumer goods, the higher the demand for labor. Obviously, if people are demanding more needs to be produced, so you're going to need more people to come and help you produce that extra units that are required. Right, the consolidation questions. These are our last lot of consolidation questions now, and all of them will be give one term for each of the following descriptions. Number 1, a body responsible for regulating labor practices and ensuring compliance with the Labor Relations Act. Right? There is a body that is responsible for regulating labor practices and ensuring compliance with the Labor Relations Act. Number 2, legislation which seeks to promote the employee's physical well-being. Number 3, quantity of output produced by workers in a certain time. Number 4, the number of workers willing and able to work for a given wage. And number 5, a collection of employees within a business who meet to discuss labor issues at work. I'm going to give you a few moments a minute or so to think about those answers. Right. Number one, the body that makes sure that the Labour Relations Act is adhered to is obviously your Labour Court. Your Occupational Health and Safety Act looks after the physical well-being of your workers. And then number three, the quantity of output that workers produce, that is the productivity. And your supply of labour for number four, being the number of workers that are willing and able to work. And then your last point is the workplace forum. This is when workers get together to discuss any labour issues. Right, the last five, a policy that tries to reduce discrimination by ensuring equal opportunity in employment. Number seven, the largest trade union federation in South Africa. Number eight, the law passed to promote equal opportunity in the workplace. Number nine, the act that ensures fair labour practices. And number 10, the act that gives workers the right to strike. Again, I'm giving you a minute to think about that very quickly. Right. Number 6, affirmative action tries to reduce the discrimination. The largest trade union in South Africa is obviously COSATU, but you're not allowed to use the abbreviation or acronym, so you have to write out the word in full, Congress of South African Trade Unions. And then number 8 is the Employment Equity Act. Number 9, your Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And number 10 is your Labour Relations Act. Okay? Right, that brings us to the end for the section on term 4, which dealt with unemployment and your labour relations. So with regards to unemployment, just to sum up, we have 2 definitions. We have the expanded definition and we have the official definition, right, or the strict definition, where in expanded definition we say anybody who doesn't have a job, they're unemployed. Whereas with the strict or official definition, they only look at those people who are actively looking for work, people who are still throwing in their CVs, so sort of what we call your because you have what we call discouraged job seekers, right? Where people have been looking and looking and looking, and then they just become discouraged because every time they are shown away. And we see there's a big discrepancy between the numbers, right? The one was at like 69% and the other one was at 34%. So there was a big difference between those numbers. Then we also looked at the reasons that we have unemployment, and we have identified 4 of them. There is the cyclical, the seasonal, the structural, and the frictional unemployment, or reasons for unemployment. We've also looked at how government deals with unemployment, what they've done to address the unemployment issue, and one of the big things is obviously the public works program, which have been implemented. Then we moved on to looking at the labor relations, and we looked at the 3 major sort of acts with regards to labor, which is your Basic Conditions of Employment Act, your Labor Relations Act, and your Employment Equity Act. But there are also other acts that impacts on labor. One of the bigger ones is QUADA, because this deals specifically with any accidents that happen where people are injured in the line of duty. And then we also looked at also heard about the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and we looked at what is contained within each of these, and the important thing you need to take away from these acts is with your Employment Equity Act, this has the affirmative action policy embedded in the act. Your affirmative action policy is not something, it's not an act on its own, okay? It is something which is part of your Employment Equity Act. And always remember that affirmative action isn't a South African concept. It is something which is practiced across the globe, right? It is a global phenomenon. And the reason that that is brought in is to do away with any discrimination on any grounds. And then we also then just went through some of the concepts with regards to these acts, so that you just know which is which. You need to understand that the one that governs the relationship between employer and employee is your Labour Relations Act, whereas your Conditions of Work will refer to your Basic Conditions of Employment Act again. Okay? And obviously, we've heard about the CCMA, you've heard about labour courts, and your Labour Appeals Court that exists as well. Grade 10s, I hope you've enjoyed this session and that you have taken away somewhat from this session. Thank you for attending, and I just want to end off with the quote from David Ricardo, who is a well-known economist, and he says, "The farmer and manufacturer can no more live without profit than the labourer without wages." Thank you.